Hi guys, welcome back to Hypermobile Friendly Workouts. Today I want to talk about 5 things that I do to help manage my hypermobility related symptoms. Now, these 5 things are all part of my regular wellness practice. I have them written down next to me because I kept forgetting them because there are quite a few more. But these are the 5 that I wanted to talk about today. So this video was really sparked by a conversation that I had with a previous client that I had been working with for quite a few years. She is also very hypermobile. And you know, as happens when you're just chatting with someone, she started asking me about what I do outside of just my regular fitness practice to help with symptom management. And as I started thinking about it, I was kind of like, there's kind of a lot. So today I want to talk about the 5 most impactful things that I think have made a difference long term. Now, some of these you may have heard of, some of these you may have tried, and some of these I have implemented more recently. In fact, the first one we're going to talk about has been my most recent implementation. And really, I just wanted to let you guys know what I've been up to in hopes that maybe it gives you some options or resources that help you in your management routine. Now, I encourage you guys, when you're starting out in any sort of like new wellness routine, first of all, give it a little bit of time. Particularly with this first one, you'll understand why. In just a second, I had to give this one a little bit of time before it became a really kind of regular part of my routine that felt really good. But I also encourage you guys to just start with a small amount of things. Don't just dive right into trying to do like a huge overhaul of your wellness practice all at once, because it can feel a little overwhelming. These 5 things were implementations that I've made really over the last probably year and a half, that I have now noticed a year to a year and a half later, the frequency of my flare-ups have reduced, the intensity of my flares has reduced, and that's been a really cool, just kind of a very cool realization to have. But so with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and dive on in, and the first thing we're gonna talk about is cold therapy. So you guys may or may not know this, but I despise the cold. So this was a really difficult one for me to just kind of like finally give a chance and jump into. The research around cold therapy has just gotten, I mean, it's been strong for a long time. I was just kind of mentally putting it off, but it has just gotten so strong that I hit this level where I was kind of like, you know what? I just want to give this a try consistently and see if it makes any difference, and see if I can get past the fact that I'm going to be very, very cold for 1 to 2 minutes at a time. I started the cold therapy by way of just doing icy showers, because I do not own a cold plunge tub. But I have been implementing icy showers 2 to 3 times a week. Full disclosure, like my process for this is, you know, I don't wash my hair every day of the week, so I only do it on days that I'm washing my hair, which is typically 2 to 3 times a week. And I'll do, you know, my whole shower routine regularly in my hellhole hot water, and then for the last 1 to 2 minutes of my shower, I will torture myself by turning the nozzle to very icy cold water. And I'm filming this in the dead of winter, so as many of you know, the water gets way colder in the winter, and I have been feeling it. But I will say I've been doing this for probably about 2 months now. It's mid-January now. I think I started kind of in the end of November of last year. 2 to 3 times a week, very consistently, plunging into the icy cold water. And I will say, this has probably been one of the most impactful changes that I feel very viscerally, in a very good way. I do find that it has helped me manage and mitigate my stress and anxiety much more efficiently. I do notice a really kind of dramatic symptom reduction, particularly immediately after the shower. I do think it's a really interesting, just kind of physical but also mental sensation to experience. And the backstory behind this is I started cold plunges. I mean, obviously, again, the research is very strong, but I started around the holidays because, as many of us know, during the holidays, we're typically eating a lot more kind of like inflammatory foods. We're drinking a little more alcohol, which is very inflammatory. I was doing all of those things around the holidays and I was really feeling it. And so naturally we are going to talk about some kind of like food changes that I've made over the last year, but I was just kind of like in these settings where I was just eating a little bit more. I was really enjoying myself with time with family. But again, I was feeling the effects of having all of these different inflammatory factors in my body. So I was kind of like, okay, well, what is, maybe something I can try or implement? And cold plunges finally made the list. And I will say, I if you haven't tried it, I would certainly encourage you to give it a shot. This is not something that I'm like, yay, let me cold plunge, because it still sucks and I still hate the cold. But for me, this is a practice in mental resilience, which is always important. But also I am hitting a point where I am starting to hate it less, because the physical benefits and the mental benefits are just so visceral for me. So I would encourage you guys, if you're gonna try it, give it 2 to 3 rounds before you're just like, oh my God, I'm never doing this again. But yeah, so it took me about 2 months to get to this spot of like actually talking about it in a positive way. If you do like the cold, more power to you, but I'm not that person. So. Okay, moving on to daily practice number 2. And this is something that, again, I don't do every day, but I probably implement 4 to 5 days a week for like 30 to 40 minutes. Now, for me, that is accessible because I'm very fortunate. I don't have young kids. I don't have to be at work super duper early. So I recognize that 40 minutes is kind of my like luxurious morning moment for myself. However, I did intentionally kind of shift my bedtime and wake up routine so that I have this time to do red light therapy very early in the morning. So for those of you guys who may not know, red light therapy is kind of this newer phenomenon that's being talked about. It's very trendy right now in like skincare. But again, the research is showing that it's coming, The research is showing that there are a lot of positive benefits, not just for things like mood, anxiety management, but actually for collagen restoration in the body, which is again why it's becoming very popular for skincare, because people are using those masks on their face. However, considering hypermobility and HEDS is a connective tissue disorder, the fact that red light therapy can be beneficial in collagen restoration, collagen, which is a big kind of makeup factor in connective tissue, I was kind of like, you know what? Let me just give it a shot. And like the long and short of it is this is one of those things where I'm still kind of like, it's like, is it really benefiting me or making a difference? I'm not entirely sure. However, the practice makes me happy because red light therapy inherently gets a little bit warm, and as we just discussed with my cold showers, I do not appreciate the cold. So it's kind of just one of those factors that the research is showing really kind of positive indications. It's still fairly young. However, this is one of those ones where I'm kind of like, you know what? I'm willing to just give it a shot, even if they find years from now that it actually doesn't do anything to boost collagen. It's just a practice that makes me happy. I have my 40 minutes in the morning, I sit under my red light, I read a book, I have my coffee. So all in all, I think it's doing good things from, if not from the actual physical restoration, from the kind of mental, emotional space of just recognizing that I have time to be calm and hopefully doing some restoration work on my body. The red light therapy device that I use is this belt that I literally just ordered from Amazon. And it's a belt that you can kind of wrap around with Velcro. So I use it in my hip and sacrum area because, as some of you guys may know, that like sacral pelvic instability tends to be where I have the most immediacy and flares, but then I also wrap it around my shoulders and use it on my upper back and neck area. And again, I just sit and do it for 20 minutes per location and sip my coffee and read my book, and that is how I start my day. And like I said, it gets a little warm, so just makes me happy. But so red light therapy is wellness practice number 2. Again, that's something that I do. I try to do it 5 days a week, just like Monday to Friday in the mornings. Usually it's more like 4 to 5 days a week, but I like to have that consistency in the morning and that time. Okay, so number 3 kind of relates back to what I was talking about in terms of like holidays, slightly higher inflammatory foods. So one thing that I did last year, and this is something that I'm probably still working on consistency to some degree, but again, the visceral benefits that I have experienced do keep me fairly consistent throughout the year. About a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now, I pretty much cut out gluten. So a number of years ago, I did a kind of an anti-inflammatory nutrition program. I hesitate to use the word diet because I was not necessarily doing this for weight loss reasons. And I know, there's a lot of verbiage around that, but I was really interested in doing this nutrition program to discover what my inflammatory foods were. So at the time, I think I spent 4 weeks and I cut out gluten for sure, eggs, dairy, soy, alcohol, and anything with like added and processed sugars. And I feel like there was like one other thing, but it was a while ago, so I can't really remember. But so it was basically an elimination nutrition program. And I spent a month not eating any of these things. So I was eating meat, I was eating starches, I was eating fruits and vegetables, beans, so, I was still eating, and I was eating a lot. And for those of you who may not know, I'm a pretty big carnivore, so I was kind of like, all right, as long as I can still eat meat, I'm a happy camper. But I viscerally remember this, over that 4-week period, I felt phenomenal. I did notice that I experienced some weight loss, which again, I think for me was probably more like kind of water loss and inflammation reduction. I was still drinking a lot of water. We always drink water. But then I was really curious to see if gluten was going to be like one of my big inflammatory factors. Because you know how sometimes when you're growing up in life and you're just kind of like, I feel like I just intuitively know this about myself. I had always felt that way with gluten. I always felt like I was, I'm not celiac. I actually did get tested a number of years ago to see if I had celiac, and it came back negative, but I was just always very intolerant to gluten. I just felt it in my core. When I was growing up, I used to eat like a bagel. We were a very big bagel family. And like would have to take a nap half an hour later. I mean, up until I was in my early 20s, like I was like a little baby. And so the first thing after the end of this 4-week elimination program, the first thing that I put back in was gluten. And let me tell you, that was not a fun experience. So I think I have officially confirmed at that point that my body is so intolerant to gluten. It hates gluten. And so I tell you this backstory because that elimination nutrition program was very insightful for me. I did also learn that I'm slightly intolerant to soy, which I'd also kind of wondered about. Not nearly the same reaction to gluten. And then I did also learn that I'm slightly intolerant to dairy when I am consuming gluten, but when I am not consuming gluten, I am not all that intolerant to dairy. So some very interesting combinations happening, but learning that about myself, I think I honestly can't even begin to describe how impactful I think it has been for my body to cut out gluten for, 95% of my life. Now, do I never eat gluten? Absolutely not. Like, I have birthday cake on occasion. Like, there are just some circumstances in life that I can't control, not cutting out gluten. I also recognize, there are people out there with celiac who are like, but that's my life, so more power to you. I'm like that with certain things. I actually do just have some food allergies that would not be good for me to consume. But the cutting out my very powerful, inflammatory foods has been a huge game changer. And I do really encourage you guys out there. This is something that I think is very under-discussed in the hypermobility community. I think the impact that our diet and that our nutrition plays on how we experience symptoms, I think is not nearly talked enough about, because food is something we are consuming every single day. I mean, it's our sustenance. And so if we're eating stuff that our body is like, I don't think so, that's not digesting well, we're just constantly, day after day after day, meal after meal, reinforcing inflammatory factors in our body, which are then reinforcing pain signals, and it's just this vicious cycle that we're always in. So honestly, this is one thing that I would really encourage any symptomatic hypermobile person to just try. Does it kind of suck cutting out a whole bunch of things for a few weeks? Yeah, but I do think, again, kind of going back to that resilience factor, it's worth the sacrifice for just a couple of weeks. I mean, you're still eating. You should not be sitting there like starving or hungry. Eat away, but just if there are foods where you're kind of like, I've always sort of wondered if that is maybe causing, inflammation, or if I'm intolerant to it. This is something I would encourage every hypermobile person to try, because I just think it is can be such a powerful change, and it has been hugely powerful for me. So in that vein, I know we're talking about some not fun ones now, I feel like, because it does seem like there's a lot of cutting out. And this next one I think is probably a big kahuna. So last May 2024, so about 8 months ago now, I actually cut out alcohol. I went dry, if you will. And this has also been, I think, another just kind of like long game effect that I didn't realize was negatively impacting my body is just silly, because alcohol is just not good for us, just period. And so I say that because I, had gone through phases before where I just didn't drink as much and whatnot. But in May of last year, I just decided, we're just gonna be done with this for now. And what that has done for me is made it very, very, very apparent how alcohol negatively impacts my inflammation, my symptoms, my mood. Because between May and probably July or August of last year, I know I just didn't have any alcohol. And so I had this really nice just kind of detox happen. And it was very weird at first. I will say one thing I didn't expect was to feel kind of weird about not drinking, but I think a lot of people kind of run into this issue, especially I'm 30, or gonna be 30 in 2 weeks, and so a lot of people in my age bracket, social drinking is just a huge part of the package, and so having the experience of kind of being the only one in the room who was not drinking alcohol for the first couple of times felt weird, and I wasn't expecting that. I was actually a little bit awkward, but then after those first couple of times, I was just all right, you know what, we're just gonna nothing had changed. I still had a great time going out with my friends and my siblings and whatever, and it eventually just kind of, it was anything, mental resilience. It was my cold showers. It was eventually kind of oh, you know what, this is actually fine. And I have my, what I call fancy juice, what others call mocktails. And I would just kind of hang with the group, and that was that. So that was an interesting just kind of saga of events, not expecting to experience this sort of awkwardness at first. But then just kind of powering through it and recognizing that everything was okay and nothing had really changed. So eventually, I think probably in September, we had like a couple of just like birthday parties and whatever. And I went out to a winery and had some wine. And oh my God, the next day, like, I mean, I think I had like a couple of glasses, you know, I didn't have a bottle to myself or anything, but I had a couple of glasses of wine. And the next day I was so hungover, so anxious, so like, I don't know if any of you hypermobile babes out there experience like buzziness in your body in like a really not great way. I was like so buzzy. And it was just one of those moments where I was kind of like, whoa, so this is what alcohol is doing to me, because I hadn't had any for such a long time. And then I was like, you know, 2 glasses in, and it was the next day was not fun. And it was the next couple of days. I mean, like, I had never really understood that like hangover anxiety thing. And oh my God, did I have hangover anxiety? And I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so that was kind of the clincher for me. And so, you know, over the course of like, you know, the rest of the year, there were occasions where I would have like a glass of wine at a holiday party or something like that. Again, for me, this isn't like 100% we're never touching this stuff again, but probably, yeah, like 95 to 98% of the time, I am cool not touching it because I know the after effects really don't feel super good. And I will say with things like cutting out, you know, I do think it's important to say that I think there's a lot of messaging around, it's like very interesting. There's like 2 sects of thinking. There's like, oh, you should cut everything out 100% of the time. And if you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong. And then there's this other kind of sect of like, oh, we should never cut anything out because that's too restrictive. And I don't really think I subscribe to either of those places. I think I prefer to be closer to this edge because I have recognized that gluten does not make me feel good. And I get to make this conscious decision that gluten doesn't make me feel good, so I don't have to eat it. And alcohol does not make me feel great and exacerbates my symptoms like nobody's business. And so again, like that just gets to be something where I get to make the decision of, as a grown-up woman, of most of the time I'm not going to drink it. And then when I am going to, well, that's my grown-up choice. But so yeah, so the anti-inflammatory, cutting out alcohol. The last thing that I have implemented very regularly has been, and this is going to be kind of funny because I recognize I am a health and fitness and movement professional. So you would think that this would come very naturally to me, but I am human. So the thing is 15 to 20 minutes of daily movement and or exercise. And I say the words movement and exercise in the way that I do as someone who does hypermobile friendly workouts. This is not like movement and exercise does not mean every single day I'm doing push-ups and burpees and lunges and planks and whatever. It's like movement and exercise is going to look very different on the day-to-day. And that is something where I've had to learn to get very in tune to my body to figure out what it is that I need. I really try to implement some sort of like strengthening segment into my week 2 to 3 times a week. But then there are days where movement and exercise for me looks more like breath work and fascial release and laying down on the floor and doing those teeny tiny little micro movements that some of you guys may have done in our videos. But that has been something that I've been trying to implement very consistently, like 5 to 7 days a week. It's just doing something to focus on the restoration and strengthening of my body. And like I said, a few days a week, that could be something more strength focused. Some of you guys may have seen my strength focused workouts. Other times it's gonna be just breath, micro movements, the really small restorative things that hypermobile bodies just need. And so I think as far as that process goes, that's been actually, I mean, full disclosure, that's something that I've implemented a little more recently, probably in the last 2 to 3 months of my life, really just carving out that time. Now, again, I recognize I am fortunate in my current circumstances of not having a lot of external factors that pull me away from that, like young kids, like, a work schedule that I don't control. And so that's another one of those things where I encourage you guys to just, even if it's starting like one 15-minute window a week, and then in a couple weeks you build up to 2 15-minute windows per week that you have to just focus on your body and tune in and see what your body needs in that moment. I do think it goes a really long way, and I have very much noticed in the last 3 months the amount of stability that I've created for myself, not trying to force myself to do, strengthening every single day, and really kind of just tuning in a bit more. One, for us ladies out there, one thing that I really have noticed and tuned into is the week when my cycle hits. That is tends to be a very flary time for me. And it was so wild because I had this realization a few months ago, and I like every single month I'd have like a sacral flare, and I'd be like, oh my God, the world is ending and I'm never going to get out of this flare, as we tend to do. And then I put it together just like 1 month, and I was like, oh, like that's what that is. That's why that flare at my sacrum keeps happening. And so I will say that just kind of tuning into the body and seeing what we need, those are the days where maybe I'm just doing a little bit more restorative work. I mean, again, for us ladies out there, there's a whole bunch of research now coming out around like workout and fitness cadences, like around your cycle, but that's a different conversation. So once again, that 15-minute just kind of daily practice of movement, I think has been an extremely powerful, extremely intuitive space for me, to just check in with my body and see what it needs. And it's been able to help me build more strength and build more stability and get to a point where, some of you guys may remember for a while there, I was having a hard time walking just a couple blocks down the street because of my hips. And I recently went to Italy and walked 25,000 steps a day, which I still don't really recommend to anyone, but I was very impressed that I could do it. So with that being said, okay, we've been talking about all this stuff for a while. So a quick recap: cold plunges, horrifying, but personally I think effective. Red light therapy. Jury's still out on it, but it makes me happy, so I continue to do it. Anti-inflammatory foods, highly, highly recommend just trying this one. And I can link, if I can find I had like a structure that I was following it a couple of years ago, so if I can find it, I'll link it below. Cutting out alcohol, kind of an interesting social experiment, but I do think very highly effective. And daily movement practice. 5 to 7 days a week, if you can get that frequency. If not, starting out with one 15-minute chunk and just building from there. And the recognition that all of these practices have been things that I've been implementing from 2 years ago to 2 months ago. And none of these practices are magic fixes. None of these practices are, the cold showers are kind of fast acting actually, but they're things that benefit your life in the long run. And I think that's a very important thing to remember when dealing with hypermobile related symptoms, is that for now anyway, there's not really a cure. And so we're not looking for, the magic fix, the silver bullet. We're looking for lifestyle changes that we can make that really just help us feel better. And these 5 have been very, very powerful for me. So with that being said, I hope you guys took something away that will be helpful to you in this video. If you liked it, if you have other things that you do that have been really helpful, please drop them in the comments, because we're all just trying to learn and better our bodies and feel better in our hypermobility. But I'm going to sign off here, and I look forward to seeing you back in another workout soon.